I'm gonna make it. So what we want to talk about again is another session on just problem solving for us that work here, because we're dealing with it all the time. You know, every single day you're dealing with solving problems. You're trying to find ways to, whether it's big or small, we just deal with problems. And this is part of successful failures. It's part of innovation out of frustration. But one of the things that Dan Sullivan talks about in his book, Who Not How, is he says a lot of times we give a lot of emphasis to what is bothering us. Okay. So think about that for a minute. What is bothering me is the starting place of problem solving. Now, we have a couple of ways to go when you're dealing with a problem, but it always starts with something is bothering you. So think about that for a minute. Now, why would he say the starting place is something's bothering you? What do you think?
I think, well, that's going to be the easiest way to identify a problem. If you're not aware of it, it's not going to frustrate you or bother you.
Yeah.
But as soon as it's a frustration to you, obviously it's probably a frustration to others if they're in the business with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to bothering, frustration, where you start to say something is, you know, our body, our design is already telling us something is bothering us. And so the first part is to recognize that something is bothering me and to acknowledge it. A lot of times what we can do when we run into a problem is we cannot acknowledge it, but do what?
Just ignore it, or
Yeah,
yeah,
just ignore
hope
it.
it fixes itself,
Yeah.
which I'm sure happens 0 times out of 10.
100%. Think about if you have a stone in the shoe. You know, you can walk around all day with the stone in the shoe. You can't ignore it. You do have that ability to ignore it, but the stone is not going to go away in your shoe. You know, that little pebble that just keeps nagging at your heel all the time. It's just there. And what it's saying is to you is, I need you to acknowledge me that it is bothering you. And then you can deal with it and take the shoe off and take the stone out of the shoe. But until we stop and actually say, okay, there is a stone in my shoe. I recognize there's a stone in my shoe. We can't go to any other steps for us. That has to be the beginning place of all problem solving. And it's probably one of the most important in order for us to not just recognize it, but then to define it. Okay. Because I could say there's something in my shoe and it's a cucumber. No, it's not. I don't know what you're doing throwing cucumbers in your shoe. But you know, but there is a problem. Levi, we were up at the wedding this weekend, so Levi and Kate stayed with my sister, and she said that he ended up finding a scorpion
Oh
in his
wow.
backpack. Okay, so there's this scorpion that's in his backpack that came crawling out of it. And so, you know, he had a choice to either ignore that there's a scorpion, because, you know, or to acknowledge it and to go, that's a scorpion. I see. And then they basically spent a pretty decent amount of time with their black light, you know, searching. They found it.
Wow.
And they hadn't seen a scorpion in quite some time. But same principle applies. You know, Levi recognized that there was a problem. He acknowledged that it was a problem. He defined what it was that the problem was so that he could go and tell other people, right? That's the who, okay, to come in and help solve the problem. And ultimately, he didn't solve the problem on his own, but he went and got other people to come
Mm.
and say, help solve this problem with me because I don't want to try to figure this out on my own. So without even like having any training, Levi went through the problem solving tactic by the who, not how in solving the problem. When all was said and done. And so, you know, define now when we talk about defining the problem, why do you think that's such a critical part to any kind of problem solving within work?
I think I mean, there's a lot of uh, there's a lot of reasons why it's critical. I think the main reason would be that at the end, when you're done resolving it, if you haven't identified the problem, you haven't fixed the problem. So it's just a lot of time wasted. So you need to get to, you need to get to the root cause of the problem, not the effects of the problem, I guess.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, you've got to really understand what is really, really bothering me and what is really going on that is a potential problem. And that becomes literally the launching pad for the rest of everything that you'll do in order to solve the problem. Okay.
Mhm.
And so that takes probably a little bit more thought, a little bit of physically writing it down. So there's something that happens when you physically write down the problem out on the paper. And what happens is that there's a connection point that starts to happen when you're writing it down and your mind is trying to clarify things. So you'll read it and you'll go, I don't think that's the problem. Okay.
Mhm.
I just did this actually on the way back on the airplane with the business plan that we are working on for the bigger, sort of, vision that we're working on. And I went through and I was really trying to say, okay, what is the actual problem that's going on? And so I went through about 10 iterations because I kept like whittling it down and changing the words and, really trying to figure out, okay, does that sound right? That is the real problem that we're trying to solve, right? So I kept having to ask myself, is that the real problem? Is that the real problem? Yes, no, no, I think we need to change this. So it took me about an hour to
Mm.
really, really nail down and go, because as soon as you nail the problem,
Mhm.
you say, this is the real issue that's really, really going on, then you can start going into solution mode. You cannot go into solution mode without the definition. Just like a doctor, we just had our pastor that let us know his son, his brother has this rare blood disease that they're putting him through chemo.
Oh,
And he's going to have to go and do a bone marrow transplant himself
oh
to
man.
help his brother. But, you know, they had to spend the time, like they weren't just going to throw, hey, let's do chemo. Like they had to find out, like, what is the blood issue?
Mhm.
And then they finally were able to define the blood issue, and then they could go into solution mode. And so that is such a critical piece to solving the problem. We tend to jump over that, uh,
Yeah.
and we waste tons of time, right, going through this. We just dealt with this one of our properties. We got a phone call from the landlord, from the property management. He's like, look, there's cracked pipes. We have to move the tenant out for a couple of days. And so me and Kelly, my partner, were just okay, but what exactly is it? Like, we need pictures. Where is it? What exactly is going on? We want to get on. So we just kept having to drill down. Like what, okay, it's exactly in this location. We know that it's not out here at the street, and the reason why is because he put the snake in and it finally hit this location, right? So we had to understand and take some work to do that. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay, so you're kind of seeing this theme about really defining the problem at the end of the day.
Mhm.
So thoughts or comments about that?
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those things that if you stop, it's tough to know if you haven't gone far enough too sometimes. I mean, on a more complex problem or something that's, one issue causes the next, you might find, um, you might find something that's like aha, this could be it. But even then, I feel as though you still have to keep digging because you might find further back, it's like, no, nope, that was still caused by something else that's lingering.
Yeah.
So I think that can be a tough point to gauge, is when do you stop digging on something too?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, you'll always have a starting place that you go to. So you might, you're gonna have okay, we're gonna start here, we're gonna move forward. And then once we do, then we might have to rewind.
No.
I go, oh gosh, that's the problem. I mean, on the fund, we've been like going through this, and then I work on, the fund model, and I'm like, oh, that's a problem. Rewind, right? Go back again, rewind. So but you keep kind of trying to walk through the model, right?
Yeah.
Identifying the knowledge, right? Go through the problem solving technique, start walking it out. That's the 70%. So we got to walk that out. And then all of a sudden you hit and then go, oh, we got to go back. This is a new issue, right? So you just keep going back through the cycle, and then you find out the who, right? And how. Okay, who's going to solve this and how are they going to solve it? And that's really the next step, is the who, like who has already solved this, or who's already figured this out, that I could just reach out to and find out how they would solve this, or how they did solve it, or who they would know to talk to who could solve it. Okay, that's I spoke to a CFO for the fund the other day, and has extreme experience in this specific space. So he could speak into things and help me start solving some problems real fast, giving me feedback on a couple things like, hey, you wouldn't do this, and here's why, and da 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 da. So real quick, we can accelerate when we finally get to the place where we say, now I need to engage the who so we can get to the how at the end of the day. That's the cycle of it. Every single time, you're just going to go back through that. Stop, acknowledge there's a problem, try to define it, what it is, then move into the who and the how. Okay, so who's going to help us solve this? How are they going to help us solve it? And then you start putting it into motion. Okay. So that's, again, I know we've talked about this. We want to reiterate it, because this is something you're going to deal with daily,
Yeah.
weekly, monthly, quarterly, and you have to get really, really good at solving problems, just like you have with your car. You're solving problems every single time you go out into that garage.
Yep.
You're just tinkering with stuff and going, okay, is that the problem? And like you just mentioned earlier, you really had to dig down and finally say, oh, these are the root problems. But there did need some work that happened up here, and then finally get down to go, oh, this is the real problem. So there's some discovery that happens in problem solving that I wish you could get around. Like I told John Waters this morning, I said, knowing what I know now, I would have started at the very, very beginning, putting 100% of my effort into finding the CFO. Like that's what I would have done first. Okay. And so that's just, again, that's learning, right? That's successful failure. You're like, okay, I would have done that different next time. And so we learn as we go. Okay. That's how we get wisdom. when all was said and done.
Oh,
So,
the video froze up for a second there.
oh, did it froze up? Okay. But yeah, so I was just saying, so again, you gotta acknowledge and accept it. This is a problem.
Mhm.
You've got to define it when everything is said and done. And then you move into the who, not how, until you hit another problem, and then you go back through. Because you could already say, well, no, we've already solved this, and then you don't acknowledge the new one,
Yeah,
and you're
yeah,
not willing to go back through it again to just keep doing that over and over again. And people just say, well, I just don't want problems to happen anymore. And my response is, I do too. It's just not reality.
yeah.
Okay. So, what your goal is to say, this is part of the process, it's never going to stop. And how do I look at problems as presents waiting to get unwrapped, as opposed to these annoying things that keep attacking me and coming after me? They're gifts given to me to unwrap and find out what's the present in there.
Mhm.
And then you keep going through that, and you'll have a different perspective on
Yeah.
is that the problems are. So any thoughts or comments on that before we wrap it up?
No, I like that. I think it's good to it's good because when a problem does rear up, it's easy to just let the frustration, take charge.
Right.
So it's good to have like a model and approach and say, nope, hold off before making decisions. This is what I got to do. I got to identify the problem and
Yeah.
then move from there. So I like this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good.